Hello, my name's Chris Gorse. We're here again with John Sturges, and we're following on from the first presentation or interview that we did, where we talked about the water resource, the fact it's a finite resource and there's a growing population and an increasing demand on the water that we've got on this planet. What we want to do today is just look at some of the issues that John has thought about in further detail, which is starting to look at desalination processes. I just want to know really what have you come up with, what issues are presenting themselves on water with this regard, John?
Yeah, last time I said that we had all these 1.4 billion cubic kilometres of water, 97% of which was saline. The whole business of desalination is that it attempts to make use of this 97%. In other words, we don't bother with the fresh water, but we try to turn saline water into fresh water, and this is what desalination is all about. And it first began in the 1970s in the Persian Gulf area, and the first plants that were built relied on the principle of distillation. So in other words, you boil the water and then you condense it, and you leave behind in the boiling fluid all the salts that were originally present, so that you end up with a volume of fresh water, the stuff that's been distilled, and a small volume of even more saline water at the end. Now, that is a perfectly feasible solution to the problem of desalination, but it does carry with it two principal problems, and one is the amount of energy that it takes to boil the water. And if you do the sums, it comes to a figure very similar to the embodied energy of concrete. So in other words, to distill a ton of water takes about the same amount of energy as it does to make a ton of concrete. And the second issue it raises is the water that's left, the highly saline stuff that's left, has to be disposed of. And of course, there isn't a magic hole that you can pour it down. And in the Persian Gulf, they have taken to pouring it back into the Persian Gulf, as a result of which the salinity of certain parts of the Persian Gulf are now higher than they were. Having said that, there are now 1,450 desalination plants in the world. But because of the high energy costs, we've had to think of other ways, and one of the other techniques that's come along is to use a filtration method whereby the water is put under pressure and then forced through a filter, which removes the salinity. Now that has an energy benefit compared with distillation. It takes less energy, but of course, because we have to pressurize the water, there still is quite a bit of energy going into it. So we're still using perhaps more energy than we would like. Now, the current state of development is that there are 3 new techniques coming along which actually don't require the water to be pressurized, so they save a further increment of energy, possibly another 30%. And the first one is forward osmosis, where we have a special membrane, and the saline water comes on one side and the clear water is passed through the membrane with the salinity being retained. That is a technique which I understand could actually come on stream possibly in the next 12 months. There are 2 other techniques which are also in a fairly advanced stage of development. One uses carbon nanotubes to remove the salinity, and the third one is a biomimetic technique. Now, by biomimetic we mean something that actually mimics a naturally occurring system. Now, in our bodies we need salt, and so our bodies have developed techniques for controlling the salinity of our bodily fluids, because salt is necessary to the working of our nervous functions. So if we can build an artificial membrane which mimics the natural ones, then we've got a technique further for distilling the water. There is this problem though, that where does the saline residue get put? And that is a problem. We can pour it back into the sea, but it exacerbates the problem. unless we can also put into the sea some living organisms which will take out the extra salinity, that is a possibility. That could be done possibly for future reference.
There's, I mean, in terms of, we seem to have two issues there. We've obviously got the, I mean, people can look at water and we can see that we've got huge stocks of seawater, and they're assuming that we can use that. Obviously, we've got to desalinate that, and that obviously impacts in terms of the energy we're using, which we've got these new techniques which are using less energy. And then we've got the residue, and it's interesting what you say, where there might be some natural products that could take care of some of the residue. But obviously what we have is a situation where we've still got a finite resource, and even when we take into account seawater or salt water, we're still not really resolving the problem. So this is going to be something we've got to consider in the future.
There are other water supplies that are stored underground, which are brackish water, which are saline. And one of the remaining problems that I've outlined these newer techniques for removing the salinity is they still require access to power supplies. So if we consider a village in the Sudan where there may be brackish water supplies 100 feet underground, there's still no prospect of getting that water or clear water to the villages unless we have a supply of electric power, and that's the problem. So while these techniques will give us access to potentially large amounts of further water, there are 150 countries in the world now using desalination techniques. So out of 200 odd, that's nearly three-quarters of the countries in the world are now using it. But and fortunately, 70% of the world's population live within 50 kilometres of the seaside. So desalination techniques have the potential to meet a lot of the requirements, but you still do need supplies of power, and you still have the problem of where to dispose of the saline residue. Those are the main issues, I think.
Well, that's interesting. I think what we'll do is obviously keep this going, because this is obviously a continuous topic that we're going to be finding more information about research that's going on and the opportunities. So thank you ever so much for that, John, and we'll be posting the next interviews online soon.